Hi everyone, welcome to another Player Development Project Q&A. Once again joined by PDP Technical Advisor Dan Wright. Dan, how are you this week?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very well, and an interesting question that's a bit of a tactical one for us today. It's come from John via the PDP Facebook page, and he has said, what are the best 9v9 formations and why? So that's a good challenge. We're going to go Monday Night Football here. Who do you want to be, mate? Carragher or Neville?
I definitely don't want to be Carragher.
Okay, good. All right, well, neither of us are going to put our hand up. So what are your thoughts initially around this question from John?
Oh, my question to John would be, what is the best 11v11 formation and why?
Okay.
I think it's, if you think about it like that, it depends, doesn't it? It depends on what you think is important in terms of how you want to play football. What are the individual needs of the players? What type of players do you have? You know, if you have three centre forwards that are going to bang goals every week, then that might change the shape you're going to play. And then maybe where they're at in their journey. So, you know, if you have individual learning plans and you have individual targets for these guys, then different shapes might stress them out a bit more. You know, for example, if you had Dave, you've got to improve your 1v1 defending, then to put him in most situations where he's going to be defending 1v1 is to only play two at the back against a team that played two up top. You know, that's an obvious one. So it's quite a big question, but for me, you know, the answer would depend around those things before we talk about, you know, sort of some of the specifics of the shapes. How about you?
Yeah, look, I think you've hit the nail on the head around the individual things. So I think a message that we've promoted a lot via the podcast and these Q&A videos is that we want to start developing environments which are focused on the individual. You know, this is what happens in the best environments, where you're looking at your players as a collective group of individuals and then how they tie together on game day and what their targets are is a sort of another challenge for coaches. But it goes back for me to the philosophy that you're trying to embed within your club. So if you're working in a club that doesn't have an overall playing philosophy, then maybe you need to take some ownership around what you want to do with your team. But hopefully you're working in a club which is challenging itself and saying, look, we want to play a certain way, or we want to develop a certain type of player. So again, when you talk about the 11v11 shape, well, what is it at 11v11 and do we work backwards? So that's a broad brush for me, but I think then the biggest focus here has to be what those players need at that point in the season or at that point on their journey. So again, we can talk about formations and shapes. So to give an example, you might be looking at counter-attack and you might be looking at attacking quickly or forward runs, forward passes as a topic. So for me, 3-2-3 would be a really good shape because you've got the opportunity to perhaps leave three players high at defensive set piece and create the opportunity to counter quickly from that moment. You've got the opportunity of having three players up front in general play. The two in the middle are going to be able to look at range of pass if you've got two players high and wide. So there's lots of outcomes within that individually. And then from the back three's perspective, if you're counter-attacking, you've got fullbacks bombing on, your centre-back's probably going to find himself isolated at some point. So that's going to enable him to defend, like you said, 1v1, or even defend outnumbered. So if both fullbacks go and support those wingers up top, and suddenly you're being countered against and you're counter-attacking weak, then there's opportunities to work on the defensive side of the game. So that's kind of one example of one shape that I've used a lot in the past, fairly recently. And I think it's about looking at, as you say, the individuals in the team, what the outcomes are and what the theme is, and obviously tie that into your style of play. Additional thoughts on other shapes from you, mate?
Yeah, I think you made some really good points about linking into the 11-a-side. So, you know, if your team plays three at the back at 11-a-side, or if it plays, you know, two centre midfielders in a 4-4-2, it's about maybe trying to replicate those pictures. So a lot of my experience would be with a 3-4-1, which was meant to try and replicate a 4-4-2 diamond. So the four across the middle was where you had your two central midfielders that had to understand how to be a 4, an 8 and a 10 at the same time. So it was, you know, working on opposite lines. So one drops in, one goes high, and then the two guys playing in the 4 had to be wingers, and then at times had to come back and be wing backs. And then for the number 9, it was probably the most artificial for the 4-4-2 because he was on his own. So then it was about maybe the opposite winger becoming you know, that sort of second striker. I was just going to ask you, because this is, you know, an age group that you've got a lot of experience with, how many different shapes would you play throughout the season? Would you literally change it up depending on the theme of the month? Would you try and do 2 or 3 a season? Would it be completely based on the players? How would you sort of find that balance?
Look, I mean, particularly in the last club I was working at, we had a bit of freedom to work within a series of shapes based on whatever the topic was. But look, I think you've got to be patient with this. And I think if we as coaches are on this journey of learning all the time and trying to improve our tactical understanding or our technical understanding of the game, and we're watching lots of football and we're learning from the best, then you've got to appreciate that a player who's probably playing 9v9 is going to be within that sort of age 10 to 13 bracket most likely. And it could take them a lot longer because they're children and they might soak up the game and watch loads of football, but there might be things that in your mind are quite tactically clear, but for an 11 or 12-year-old child, that's going to be quite difficult. So I would advocate for giving it time with different shapes, whether it's a month of the same shape or a couple of months of the same shape, to let players understand how it works. So 2-5-1 is a formation I used a lot recently because the part of the club philosophy was having a 4-8 and a 10. So we wanted that midfield 3 and the players around it. So a 2-5-1 really tied into a 4-3-3 quite nicely. Now the benefit of that is you had that rotation of the 3 midfield players all the time. Now whether you had a 4 who was sort of a constant pivot and a screener, and the 8 and 10 rotated as to one to the side and one higher, you were going to get outcomes for that midfield 3. And then when they got pushed into an 11v11 environment, that midfield 3 combination was quite natural to them. And what we also saw there was that if, for example, one of the defensive 2 decided to go on a little bit and perhaps sort of into that fullback-like role, maybe the 4 has got to recognise that and drop in and support his other centre-back because the second centre-back's gone on like a fullback, and we would encourage those runs. So again, you're still getting players isolated defensively, still getting players challenged off the ball in those difficult scenarios where they might have to be 1v2 or 1v3. But the 5 through the middle enabled wingers to stay wide, and it enabled a midfield 3, which obviously replicates the 11-sided game. And it's a formation that I enjoyed working with, and the players did too.
Yeah, I think there's probably advantages and disadvantages to doing both. So the club that I worked in when I was playing the 3-4-1, we had to play the 3-4-1 in every single game. And I found that frustrating because at times I wanted to play 2 up top. But and what I actually learnt was that you could just play the 1 formation all the time, but in certain games the players understood they could take more risks or play higher up the pitch or play closer to the mates, or they could play further from the mates. So if the game was not challenging, the 3 at the back would actually be a 1 at the back, and the 2 would go really high, and which would push the wingers on. So you almost had 3 up front anyway. So I suppose what I'm advocating here is that if you did just have one shape that you did the whole season, it's about those learning experiences of, okay, in today's game, you could actually play higher up the pitch as a centre midfielder because, do you know what, Dave's all right to do the defending on his own. So you can go be a real number 10 and go and play with the 9. But when we go and play maybe a stronger team, all of those 4 need to get together. We need to have our distances sorted. We need to get compact. So maybe the learning focus wasn't so much around shapes and actually, X's and O's. It's about distances, and it's about relationships, and it's about the principles of the game, which they were learning through week to week outcomes, rather than, I'm going to be a mini Mourinho and change the shape to what the other coach is doing.
Yeah, it's
just about keeping your shape but doing it slightly different or doing it better, because today we're playing against a team that got 3 up front. Yeah. We've only got 3 defenders, so what does that look like? So I think there is benefits to playing 2 or 3 shapes throughout a season, and I think you could coach that and there would be some learning outcomes. But I suppose it's not about changing it and being every single week reactive to what's going on, and the kids just playing in this constant sort of flux of, am I fullback, am I centre back, because if you just nailed one formation for a whole year, I think the kids would really understand it, and then you'd have learning outcomes of, okay, actually no, today you're all right, you can push on a bit, there's no need for you to cover. Yeah. So it's about linking into those principles of the game, which is why I sort of answered the question with, well, what's the best 11-a-side shape?
Yeah.
The best teams in the world don't really tend to change their shape, apart from maybe Guardiola, who has a lot of fun doing it. But traditionally a Barca would play maybe this shape, and they maybe would play 3 at the back occasionally.
Yeah.
But you just see, their centre backs splitting much, much higher, and Busquets playing deeper. The shape is still the shape. It's about what does that shape look like in that moment with those players.
And I think it's easy as adults to overcomplicate it. We don't want to overload all the time in terms of information, and I think we've got to remember that. And going back to the shapes I was talking about, I think from my experience, the better I've got at understanding the individuals within the group, the more my shapes will then reflect those players. So if you had a squad of 18 or 20 kids, and they might be split into 2 games of 9v9, well, it would be, which kids have I got now? And do I have, well, I've really got 2 players that are working on central midfield targets. That might be receiving on the half turn. It might be playing longer range passes. But if I've got 2 players playing in a 3-2-3, and I think, well, there's only really 2 players who are going to need that role, then that's the shape we'll play. If it's a case of I've got 3 midfielders now and I need to play 3 players in the center of the park, it might be the 2-5-1. Or do I have 3 attackers, as you said earlier? So for me, it's about those individuals and how you can tie the shapes together. It's very easy to get hung up on them and stress too much about them, but it ties back to your philosophy and the individuals.
Yeah, it's about not playing Paul Scholes left midfield in a World Cup England team, isn't it? It's not, it's about, if you've got these players, well, that determines that we kind of do this, which kind of makes sense. But you see, even at the top level, people shoehorning players into positions just to get them on the pitch. My sort of final thought for this one was going to be, if you are fortunate to have a games program, a fixture list, and then you go and play tournaments might be the time to change it. So you might have the experience of, Sundays throughout the season look like this shape, but when we go and play in a tournament, we might play these shapes, just to give us a completely different learning outcome. And I think the kids kind of get that, and if they might come to you and say, "Oh, can we try this because we want to put 2 up top today?" And I think that sort of, your one sunny Saturday might be the time to do it, and then throughout the season you could have the sort of bread and butter of, no, this is the shape and this is how we're trying to do it. And then you might, something we've talked about before about playing kids into different positions. So if you've got a really rigid shape, I think kids would be more comfortable playing out of position, if you have a position when you're 10. That's another
debate.
But do you understand what I mean? If everybody understands what we're trying to do and how we play it from the back, how we switch, how we go through the thirds, then you might be more comfortable playing left side of defence for a game, because I know what that looks like. The answer would be go and have a play with it, but don't be too reactive and don't change it just because you lost the game or you played badly one week.
Yeah, definitely. Well, some sound advice there, and obviously we'd point John in the direction of our session plan library, and obviously put the caveat on that they're very much adaptable plans, and it's important to tie those into what your players' needs are. But there's well over 70 video session plans in the library there for John to have a look at. So Dan, thanks once again for your time. A really interesting discussion, and we will look forward to another PDP Q&A very soon.